get out of Egypt if you have Egypt's seed within you. The first thing Yahweh does is when they refuse to listen to him, he then begins the process of what it's going to take to cleanse them, to bring them out. Back here in Exodus, it's only after Israel refuses to listen to Moses that he goes to Pharaoh. In verse 11, it says, "Go in, speak unto Pharaoh, king of Egypt, that he let the children of Israel go out of his land." If you look at that term, go out, it's used again and again within the story of the Exodus. Every single time Moses goes to Pharaoh, he makes the statement, "Let my people go." It's the same word right here, where he first tells Pharaoh to let Israel go out of his land. That term go is very important, because remember, he only goes to Pharaoh after Israel doesn't listen. The word go in Hebrew is Strong's number 7971, shalach. It means to send away, to let go, to stretch out, but it can also mean to divorce. In other words, every single time he goes to Pharaoh, he tells him, "Divorce my people." What you see here is that Israel has married themselves to these pagan gods of Egypt. And because she is refusing to listen, she's refusing to separate herself. She doesn't listen when the word of Yahweh tells her, "Come out of her, my people, separate yourself, come back, be holy." He then goes to Pharaoh and tells Pharaoh, "Divorce my people." He is going to make Pharaoh release her within these judgments. Now, this is further emphasized if you look in Exodus chapter 6, verse 1. Right before this Torah portion starts, the statement is made, "For with the strong hand he shall let them go." Shalach, that word right here. "And with the strong hand shall he drive them out of his land," speaking of Pharaoh. That term drive is Strong's number 1644, garash. It means to drive out, to expel, to cast out, to drive away, but it also means to divorce. Remember, anytime something is repeated within the scriptures, it's there for emphasis. Again and again within this story, he emphasizes the fact that he is going to make Pharaoh divorce Israel. That's important because it gives you insight into why these judgments affect Israel. The first time this word garash is used is in Genesis chapter 3, verse 24, when Yahweh himself drove out man from the garden. It ties together the fact for you that this is what they are involved in. In the garden, the reason they are driven out there is because they then put themselves in bondage. They chose to partake of a different seed. They allowed a different seed to be planted within them. They stopped listening to the words of Yahweh as well. And you find them driven out from the garden. And here, years later, you see the descendants doing the same thing in Egypt. They've allowed a different seed to be planted within them. And they're once again in the same predicament that Adam and Eve were in at the beginning. But not only are the Israelites in Egypt within this same predicament, but today the house as a whole also has this same problem. Now we're going to look at these first few judgments that fall upon the land of Egypt. Because if this is truly something that Yahweh wants to tell us, a warning for our days, then it would be to our best interest to truly study it and to look at this so that we can understand what he is saying to us. Now, the first three judgments will actually show you a different characteristic of the bride. He's going to show you some things that he's dealing with in his body today, things that have to be dealt with before he brings you out of Egypt. The first judgment that happens here is when the water turns to blood. If you'll turn with me to Exodus chapter 7, verse 17, this is where we're given the story of when this first judgment happens. In Exodus chapter 7, verse 17, it says, "Thus saith Yahweh, in this thou shalt know that I am Yahweh. Behold, I will smite with the rod that is in mine hand upon the waters which are in the river, and they shall be turned to blood. And the fish that is in the river shall die, and the river shall stink, and the Egyptians shall loathe to drink of the water of the river. And Yahweh spake unto Moses, say unto Aaron, take thy rod and stretch out thine hand upon the waters of Egypt, upon their streams, upon their rivers, and upon their ponds, and upon all their pools of water, that they may become blood, and that there may be blood throughout all the land of Egypt, both in vessels of wood and in vessels of stone. What message is Yahweh sending to Israel through this first judgment? This is the first thing he does after they don't listen. The first thing to affect them is this water turning to blood. Why is this significant? What have they become involved in, and what message does it have for us today? Well, if you look, we said earlier that every judgment that fell upon Egypt was against a particular god that Egypt worshipped. The Nile River within the Egyptian culture was referred to as the womb. And with that understanding, a very interesting picture begins to play out before us, because it is the waters of the womb that protect the seed. But here these waters have turned to blood. It becomes symbolic of the menstruation of the woman. This would flush out the seed. It represented death and life being lost. And it also would make the woman nidah, or ceremonially unclean according to the Torah. This becomes a message from Yahweh himself to his people that his bride has been housing the wrong seed. And because of that, what does he do? He judges her womb. He exposes her as nidah, as unclean. She becomes unfit to be drawn near to her true husband. This becomes a very serious problem if he truly is the air that you breathe, and you understand what has been lost here. Israel would have understood what they had been involved in. They would have understood the significance now of their actions when Yahweh begins to judge them in this manner. It showed them, without a shadow of a doubt, where they stood in their relationship with him. It showed them that they were truly unclean. Hidden within the Hebrew language, it shows you exactly that this is truly a message to his bride. There are clues, if you will, if you begin to study. He leaves you these clues so that you can begin to see what's hidden beneath the surface. In verse 18, you'll see the connection that he is truly speaking to his bride, that it's not just about Egypt, but it's all about the bride. In verse 18, the statement is made, and the Egyptians shall loathe to drink of the water of the river. Well, that term loathe in Hebrew is Strong's number 3811, la'ah. It means to be weary, to be impatient, to be grieved, or to be offended. It happens to be the root of the name Leah. Leah was the wife of Jacob. She serves also as a shadow picture of the bride of Messiah. Here, Leah represents the one to whom the harvest is going to be grievous. Why? Because she has deaf ears. That's what her name means. He's beginning to reveal things that are within the bride that need to be dealt with. He's showing her of what the potential could be if she doesn't listen. There's another interesting tidbit here within this judgment upon Egypt. In verse 19, he goes through and he describes all of the water sources of Egypt that are turned to blood. He doesn't do this for filler material. He doesn't do this just to state because he felt like listing the streams and the rivers and the pools. But if you look within this listing of the water sources of Egypt, you'll see one particular water that is only listed right here in the story of the Exodus. In the next judgment of frogs, he also lists the water sources of Egypt, but he leaves one out. And this one water source that is listed here but nowhere else ties together the fact for you that truly this was a picture of the bride who had become unclean, who had become nidah. That's the word pools. Pools of water is only seen tied to this particular judgment. The word pools is Strong's number 4723, mikvah. It means hope. It comes from the root kavah, which means to wait, to look for, to hope, or to expect. But it's significant because the mikvah is the name of the ritual bath that would cleanse a woman who was nidah, or unclean. And here in Egypt, first he shows her that she is unclean. She is nidah. But not only does he stop there, he then goes on to show her that the way she would cleanse herself, the mikvah, has also been turned to blood and shown as insufficient and unclean. Why? Because of what she's involved in. The only way to cleanse the bride now is by the washing of the water of his word, of the Torah, as we are told in Ephesians chapter 5, verse 26. But this is a problem because she's not hearing the word. So the only way she can be cleansed is something that she has rejected in the first place. Instead, she has turned to the river. This is what she has been involved with the worship in Egypt. The word river is Strong's number 2975, Yeor. It means river, stream, the Nile. But notice that on the end of this term, Yeor, you have the word or, which means light. They have turned to a different source of light, a counterfeit. Instead of the light of the word, they've turned to the light that Egypt had to offer, and that's why they're in the condition that they find themselves. Two more facts are given within this judgment that help us to understand this message that Yahweh is sending to his people. We are told that the fish died, but we are also told that there was blood in vessels of wood and in vessels of stone. Now, before we leave that phrase, vessels of wood and stone, you'll often see these two things, wood and stone, used together to describe the idols that were worshipped throughout the history of Israel within the scriptures. He often refers to idols of wood and stone. But you will also see these two words put together in Deuteronomy chapter 10, verse 3, where the statement is made, "And I made an ark of shittim wood and hewed 2 tables of stone," describing the Ark of the Covenant and the commandments, the ketubah, the wedding contract, the wedding covenant. Here in Egypt, the idols of wood and stone have replaced the very presence of Yahweh and his words, his ketubah. If you look at these words, fish, wood, and stone within the Hebrew, you'll see the final statement of this judgment. The word fish is Strong's number 1710. Dagah. It means fish, but it comes from the root meaning to multiply, to increase. Its primary meaning is to cover. Then you have the term wood, Strong's number 6086. The word etz. It means tree, wood, or timber. It comes from the root atzah, which means to shut. And finally, the word stone, Strong's number 68. The word eben, meaning stone. This, however, comes from the root banah, which means to build, to establish, to cause to continue, but it's used in the idea of building a family. So when you look at what he chooses to judge right here, the first thing he calls his people's attention to, we are told that Yahweh shuts the womb, so his adulterous bride will be unable to continue increasing and building the family of her lover Egypt. This was a very clear statement made by this judgment. It was a statement that Israel would have understood, knowing what they had been involved in and knowing the cost of their involvement. But yet they don't choose to listen just yet. It takes 2 more judgments for them to fully give their attention to Yahweh. Before he makes the distinction, there's still 2 more messages that they have to receive from him. The next judgment that falls upon the land of Egypt and Israel alike is the judgment of frogs. In Exodus chapter 8, starting in verse 2, he gives you the details of this. In 8:2 it says, "And if thou refuse to let them go, behold, I will smite all thy borders with frogs, and the river shall bring forth frogs abundantly, which shall go up and come into thine house and into thy bedchamber, and upon thy bed, and into the house of thy servants, and upon thy people, and into thine ovens, and into thy kneading troughs." Notice that he gives you the location exactly where this judgment goes. He's given you insight into exactly what's been going on with Israel while in the land of Egypt. And if you want to listen to the rest of this and get the rest of the messages that Yahweh is sending not only to Israel but also to us today, please tune in to the other side. Thank you for listening. Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom. Thank you for tuning back into us here at Manna from Heaven Ministries. My name is Brittany Scott, and we've been looking at this week's Torah portion, Vayera, and we've been focusing on the first judgments that fell both upon Egypt and upon Israel. We just finished